When I finished college, I was living in a one-bedroom townhouse. I met a guy on Plenty of Fish, and at that time I wasn't exactly smart about my online digital footprint. Not like I've really changed, but at least now I'm not as ridiculous as I was. Anyway, he seemed like a decent guy. He was really good looking, said that he had a good job, nice teeth, don't judge me, and looked like he cared about his personal health. All things I would typically look for in a guy. I'm not a shallow person by any means, but I like to be presentable, and if I'm with someone, I would like them to care about being presentable in a business environment also. After about a week of chatting online, we agreed to meet. We met at a restaurant downtown, which was really far from where I lived. When I got there, I noticed him sort of standing at the door, and we sat down to eat, and the evening went pretty well. At the end of the date, we said goodbye, and I got into my car and began to drive away. But I realized right away that he was following me. Because of the distance to my house, I wasn't immediately scared because, it's a big city. Maybe he's going to turn off the freeway or something. But he didn't. My exit was coming up, and I decided not to take it. I just kept driving, and I circled the entire city on the freeway, and he stayed right behind me. At this, I was starting to panic a bit, so I decided to go to my friend's house instead of mine, and when I pulled out the exit, I noticed that he didn't. So I had a little bit of a moment of breathing and decided, okay, screw this, I'll just go home. I took the off-ramp back onto the freeway and began going back to my exit. I got home and showered and was getting ready for bed, and I started feeling dumb because, was that really him? Am I just overreacting? Do I ask if he was following me? Just a number of things were racing through my overactive imagination. Or so I thought, at least. I decided that I was going to message him and just say, had a good time, good night. And when I started typing, all of a sudden a message came through to my phone of a picture of my car outside of my house. I was really freaked out by that. My heart jumped out of my chest, in fact, and I started shaking. I didn't know what to say, and he texts me and says, I didn't know you lived across the street from me. Now, I've met my neighbors before, and not once have I ever met this guy. There's a huge apartment complex kitty corner to my townhouse, so maybe that's where he lived? I don't know. I popped up and went to sort of look outside, and there he was, just standing there outside like he was waiting for me. I opened the door, and he asked if he could come in and if I wanted to still hang out. I told him that I was sort of exhausted and I would rather just crash out as it had been a long day. He left at that, and that was pretty much it for that night. The next morning I woke up to go to work and did my hair and everything like I always do, and when I got outside, my windshield had been completely smashed in. My car was keyed and my back two tires were slashed. And as I was noticing the damage to my vehicle, the same guy comes out of his car with 2 coffees and is like, oh, I thought I would surprise you with a morning coffee. So, again, I'm pretty freaked out. And at this, I called the cops and I reported the damage to my vehicle. This guy offered to drive me to work instead, and something in my gut was just like, don't you dare get in that car. So I called my boss and told them the situation and explained that I wasn't going to be there until at least after the police came. This guy, too, just hung out the whole time. When the police finally did get there, this guy was acting really suspicious, and he walked away and was sort of hiding on the other side of cars, and I filed the report, and the police basically said, hope you have insurance, and then they were on their way to leave. They pulled around the corner, and all I heard was the siren on the cop lights turn on, and the cops screaming, freeze, put your hands in the air and get down on your knees. I look, and the cop has his gun out at this guy, and this dude's on the ground getting arrested all of a sudden. I spoke to the cop after he got this guy into the back of his vehicle, and he explained that he was actually wanted for stalking, breach of probation, assault with a deadly weapon, fraud, and even aggravated sexual assault. And to say that I was shook is a complete understatement. It took me at least a couple of days to get over the hypothetical situations that could have happened. About a week later, I was on my way out the door to work, and guess who's sitting in my driveway? We live in Canada, so essentially you're released on conditions until you go to jail. I told him that I was late for work, but that I would call him after I was done. I never went to work that day. I went and found a new apartment on the other side of the city. I also changed my phone number and hired my friend's husband and his friends to go pack my apartment up and move it to their place for a month, and then move it to my new place because I was just way too scared of this dude and really worried that he was going to follow them while moving. So that's my story, and that was the first and last time that I ever used plenty of fish. I guess you could say that I found out why people don't pick up hitchhikers now. So, as I was driving from Texas to Cali, around an hour after I started my drive, I saw this guy with his dog on Route 66 in the middle of nowhere, at least 3 miles away from even the nearest gas station. It's cold, and I wasn't in a rush, so I decided to ask him if he wanted a ride. Turns out that he was trying to go to a city in Arizona that was like only 20 miles off of my route, so I offered to let him join the trip. He was chill, seemed normal enough, and looked like he cared for his dog. His original story was that he started walking in Mississippi after some reason. He lost his job and everything went down the drain, so he walked or hitched to Texas, where he got stuck for like 3 months and was trying to get to his mum so she could help him out. I bought him some food after asking if he ate, which he said that he hadn't. And so them good deed endorphins are hitting just right at this moment, and I feel like I'm doing a good thing. After around 200 miles, though, he tells me that he just called his mum while I was refilling my gas, and apparently she went to LA for a vacation, so he would just ride with me until I got to Cali. Okay, kind of weird, I suppose, and sporadic, but I didn't pay too much mind. We chatted, and again seemed pretty normal. Until we got to Arizona, that is. He starts bringing up Trump and how the election was stolen and all sorts of weird conspiracy theories, which was obviously a red flag, but I just asked him to drop it as I don't like to talk about politics anyway. He then asks if I could just drop him off at his, quote, 2 girlfriends at his house, which he got after his mum passed, and he inherited a town in Arizona. He said that he called beforehand and they are expecting him after 3 months. He also mentions, almost like nothing during an earlier convo, that he has mild schizophrenia. Obviously not much of that made sense, but I started putting it all together. I don't think he even has a coherent goal of what he's doing, so when we get to Arizona finally, and we're in the last 10 miles to his now 1 girlfriend, which he claims that he loves, I start to wonder, am I about to drop a mentally ill man off 2 states away in the middle of nowhere where it's about to get freezing? Oh, and plot twist too, I didn't even notice at first, but apparently he wasn't even using a real phone. He didn't even have one. Anyway, as we got to his girlfriend's house, I told him, "Hey man, do you want me to wait here just in case she isn't home or something?" Thinking that I could at least talk him into letting me drop him off to a nearby homeless shelter or something. And exactly what I thought would happen, happened. He said, "I guess I got the wrong info, and she doesn't live there. My other family members live there, though. Yeah, let's just go to Cali to see my mum." As he sat down in the car, which I've now been driving with him for like over 9 hours, I think, I told him that maybe he isn't in the best mental state at the moment, and his mental illness could be playing tricks with him. And upon saying that, man, he totally flipped out of nowhere and said that if I bring up his schizophrenia ever again, that he was going to kill me. He wasn't really threatening at all though, so I simply said, "Bro, I don't feel comfortable driving you to Cali, but I don't want to leave you and your dog in the about to be freezing cold. Do you at least want me to drop you off at a homeless shelter or something?" And then he just swore and said, "I'll just walk to Cali myself." Mind you, he said this in the mountain town of Arizona where it's about to get freezing cold. He has no money, no food, no water, with at least 10 miles down a pretty uninhabited road, and I'm pretty sure that he didn't have family that lived in that house that he went to. And he just ended up leaving with his dog, and I sat there dumbfounded and then left as there was nothing more that I could really have done at this point. I don't know where this guy ended up in the end, but man, I hope that he's safe and getting some help because that guy, I feel sorry for him. During the beginning of my freshman year, one of my teachers was actually having some health problems, so we had subs most days. This happened a few months after she came back. So one day, my dad was in the grocery store and I was waiting outside for him. I was sitting on a bench when one of the subs that we had came up to me. There was a gym across the street and he looked like he'd just come from it as he was wearing workout clothes and was holding a large duffel bag. He knew my name and started talking to me about school. Me being young and naive, I just thought that he was being friendly and didn't really realize anything was off. After a while, he sat down on the bench and got really close to me. We had been talking about a book that I was reading for school, and then he started telling me that he had a signed copy of it in his car and that he would really like to show it to me. I know that I'm stupid, but at that point, I still didn't really think anything was off. He kept on mentioning his car and that he needed to drop his bag off, but he'd really like to continue the conversation and I could walk with him. About 20 minutes into the conversation, I would say. I know, it should have been a red flag. I mean, what teacher talks to a student in public for that long? But my dad finally came out and freaked out when he saw some random middle-aged man talking to his teenage daughter. When the sub saw my dad, he introduced himself as my teacher, but then sort of left really hurriedly. Somehow at that point too, I still didn't feel that off. Until a week later when I was reading the book that we had been talking about, and something just clicked. I started freaking out a bit because, well, he was huge, like well over 6 feet tall, and he could have easily overpowered me if he got me into his car. Plus, we were mostly by ourselves in the car park. Also, he could have had anything in that duffel bag. I think the final thing that confirmed his intentions, though, was when a few weeks later I had stayed after school to talk to a teacher and was sort of taking a shortcut through one of the campus buildings. I was the only one in the hallway and looked into one of the classrooms and saw him. We made eye contact and he yelled my name, and at that, I just started running down the hallway as quickly as I could, and he started screaming at me to wait, that he needed to talk to me. I didn't stop running though until I was a few blocks away from the school, and after that, this guy just literally disappeared off the face of the planet. I, nor anyone, never really saw him again, and his whole disappearance was really strange. I really wanted to report him, but I actually had no idea what his name was. None of my friends did, and after we sort of asked around a bit, no one seemed to have this guy's name. I feel especially bad about this though, because what if this guy's done this to others since then? I don't know. I guess one silver lining of online school is, as a sub, he's probably out of a job, and the lockdown would make it harder for him to do that to others, I suppose. That is, if he was actually a teacher to begin with. So this event happened when I was around 8 or 10 years old in the garden of my house that I used to live in. I'm telling this story as I remember it without fabricating anything whatsoever as well. I liked to play with the ball that I had or look through the chain link fence which separated our family's property from a river, Now, to explain the situation which occurred as well, I also need to explain the shed that we had in the garden. This shed was placed directly at the back of the garden, in the middle of said chain link fence. This meant that I could enter the shed from the front, go to the right side of the shed or the left, but not take the back as it was placed in front of the fence. Another important note as well is that the right wall of the shed had a window that would grant you vision of the inside of the entire shed. Now, one of the things that I really enjoyed doing was walking over to the right side of the shed, knocking the window 3 times, ducking down, then getting up and looking directly at the window. I remember doing this because it was fun for little old me, but of course nothing would ever show itself, and I only did this in a way to sort of roleplay. But this day was different. Now, although parts of my memory are obviously a bit hazy, I remember the main event with perfect detail. I was watching the river through the fence, and then I walked to the right side of the shed. I knocked on the window 3 times and ducked down. When I jumped back up and looked through the window, there was this pale, white humanoid thing sprouted up, looking at me. I remember it looked me in the eyes, then it opened its mouth and started moving it. It wasn't moving it in a way as if it was talking, but it was just moving its lower jaw really quickly. It's hard to describe, but it was just moving its mouth really quick, and I instantly felt maliciousness coming from this creature. After that, it just ducked back down just as quickly as it had came. The situation must have been no longer than 5 seconds, and I remember just staring at the window, sort of dumbfounded, completely shocked at what I just saw. Even though remembering this situation now makes me really creeped out and scared, 8 or 10-year-old me was more curious and perplexed than scared at the time. So I did what any curious child would have done, and I entered the shed. After all, there was only one way in and out, which was the front door. Plus, the only window of the shed could not be opened anyway, so that thing must be inside somewhere. When I walked into the shed, I didn't see anything. The shed itself was pretty small, so there would have been nowhere to hide either. And I just remember being really confused more than anything, so I just closed the door and continued playing outside. Looking back at this situation as an adult, though, I would have absolutely run away, as this thing was only human-shaped, but definitely not from our world. Also, I tend to get scared easily as well these days. The situation only really ever happened to me once and never again, even though I played the window knocking ritual dozens of times after the event occurred. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it was just an overactive imagination, and I'm definitely open to that idea. But the only problem was that the creature, it just felt so real, and I can't imagine young me conjuring such a creepy thing from my mind. I also thought that maybe it was my reflection being slightly distorted as it rose up at a similar time that I did. The only problem with that theory is that the creature ducked down while I was still standing up. If you guys have any theories or suggestions or ideas or anything, or even maybe just some questions, then please feel free to leave something in the comment section below, as I would love to hear them. So first off, I feel as though I should give you guys some background information about myself. I was raised by my mother, who is 50% Cherokee and 50% French. Us kids have never met our biological grandpa, though, and believes in paranormal things, but tries to pretend that it isn't there. And my father, who is Scottish, English, German, and Jewish by blood. He, on the other hand, is 100% atheist and is rather skeptical about things that he can't explain. He endeavors to be a logical and scientific person in all things. Well, due to major differences in personalities, beliefs, and values, they divorced when I was about 8. She soon married my stepfather, who was a devout Southern Baptist from Mississippi, and basically gave up her identity as a native and became a God-fearing woman. Despite issues with my mother, my dad continued to let us visit with her mum and stepdad because he felt that they were good people. But they taught us many things about native culture, spirituality, legends, and the people, and my grandmother and I spent a lot of time together, so I was given an opportunity to learn Cherokee medicine. My grandma actually comes from a long line of medicine men and women and is one herself. But anyway, now so many years later, at the ripe age of 23, I'm practically one myself too. So, this isn't a ghost story by any means, but I do believe it qualifies as paranormal, as it's definitely outside the usual daily happenings, that's for sure. About 2 years ago, my father, brother and I moved into a new home, a little more in the country than our previous homes had been. It was all something that we thoroughly enjoyed because we grew up immersed in nature and we had a love for the land. Shortly after moving there, about 3 months in I'd say, I decided it was time to expand my family by getting myself a puppy. This would be the first dog that would actually be in my care. I've always had a very strong connection to dogs as my guiding spirit is a wolf. I learned this many years ago from some practices in my culture. But after a while of searching, I came across a beautiful 5-month-old male German Shepherd pit bull mix, and I went to meet him and instantly fell in love. He was the greatest as well, very sweet and kind to cats even, and also protective of me. He became my best friend pretty quickly, and he was just everything that you could want in a dog. Now, anyone who has owned a puppy or a young dog will know that body training, it's quite a task. Even after being with us like 2 months, he was still waking me up every 2 to 4 hours to go outside. I'll admit that it was hard on me, but it had to be done. But on this occasion in particular, we got a late-night visitor that we were definitely not expecting. So, like I said, my dog woke me up at night. It was about 2:45 in the morning, I'd guess. I wasn't ready, but I dragged myself out of bed and clicked on the leash. Opening the back door, I was instantly greeted with a cool breeze. I rolled my eyes and went out into the yard with my pooch, and he did the usual dog thing, sniffed around and jumped into the freshly cut grass, completely forgetting what we'd come outside to do in the first place, but I whistled at him, recaptured his attention, and he got back to business quickly. As he squatted, I turned my head to the sky, offering him some privacy. The moon was exceptionally large that night, almost full but not quite. During this observation, I began to realize, though, that there was no typical nighttime noise around me. And as if that wasn't unusual enough, I had a shiver go down my spine, and my hair began to stand on end. That's when I heard my dog as well let out a growl as he pinned himself against my legs. When I looked down at him as well, his tail was tucked and his hackles were raised. When I tried to move, he pressed himself against me more as well. Another shiver came over me, and now I took the opportunity to follow where his eyes were looking. And when I did, I was looking at what appeared to be a coyote. Not totally uncommon in this area as well. I mean, we'd heard them on many nights while living here, but this was different. Looked different and felt different for sure. The most frightening thing, however, was that it was looking right back at me. I didn't move, I didn't take my eyes off of it, and that's how I was able to see its features so clearly in the moonlight. Its fur looked thin, even bald in some spots maybe. Its eyes were yellow, not reflective yellow like you'd see in a dog in the dark, but yellow like the sun, very contrasted against the black of the night. Then, looking more closely, I noticed that its back legs were longer than a normal coyote's, longer than any canine creatures should be actually. Starting at the hips and going down, they seemed to look almost bipedal in design. I think that's when it dawned on me just what I was looking at. Well, I picked up my 60-pound dog, never taking my eyes off this creature, and as I did, I said a Cherokee prayer in my head that I'd learned from my grandma. And as if it was physically upset, it sort of backed up slightly, and then I heard a voice that perfectly mimicked my grandma say, "Why would you do that, Micahs?" Now, no one aside from my grandparents ever called me that. It was their special name for me, in fact. But with that, I didn't waste any time, and I darted for the door, dog still in my arms, entered, put him down, and I quickly locked it behind me. The noise must have woken my brother as well, because he came into the kitchen all bothered. He asked me what was going on and why the dog was all riled up. I held my finger to my mouth and shut off the light. We then made our way into the living room and shut that light off as well. And honestly, just like something out of a horror movie, the outline of a tall humanoid thing shone through the stained glass of the small window on the door, thanks to the bright moonlight. Well, we both froze and we made a grab for the doorknob when it started to turn, capturing it just in time to lock it. That's when it spoke to him, but this time in my grandpa's voice. "Bubba, why don't you let Grandpa in?" They live on the reservation in Cherokee, NC. His face, though, turned ghost white, and he turned to me. That's when I mouthed the word, and he paled even more. It began to tap on the glass, and we both went into my room, and we just ignored the knocking. After some time, the knocking stopped, and everything went quiet. And after checking around and looking out all the windows, there was nothing to be seen, so we ended up just going to bed, although I didn't sleep well that night. The next night, around the same time though, the tapping grew louder this time. We sat in the living room praying that it would go away, but the tapping turned into knocks, which turned into pounding the more that we prayed. This must have woken up my father too, because he came downstairs in a huff. We told him about the night prior during the day, but he didn't believe us, which was typical, and thought that it was just one of my brother's friends being a jerk. So when he saw the silhouette in the window, he grew more angry and made a beeline for the door. We yelled at him not to open it, but he did. But instead of harming him, it seemed to be afraid because it got down on all four legs again and just sort of disappeared down the road. At that moment, my dad's face paled as he stumbled back a few steps. He locked the door behind him quickly, and eventually we all went to bed. The next day, we talked about the situation. I explained to him that the natives call this creature a skinwalker. They aren't very common in Cherokee legend. They're more of a Western native legend, but my grandparents still taught us about them. Dad, being the skeptic that he was, though, just summed it up as a weird thing that he couldn't explain. Later that day, I went to our local craft store and bought juniper ash, as my grandma instructed me to do, and I sprinkled it around our house. And after that, it never returned. My dog was just never the same after that night. It's as though the entire experience sort of changed him, because he went from this loving animal to sort of mean and unpredictable. He started lashing out at anyone who wasn't female. We tried correcting it over the course of a year and a half, but nothing really helped. He finally harmed my brother as well, causing him to bleed, and after that I was forced to find him a new home. Luckily, he's with a couple who are both female, and he seems much happier, but even to this day, I guarantee that he won't go out at night. I didn't mention the name of the creature after that very many times, because it's considered a bad omen in native culture to give those things energy. But if anyone is feeling nervous after reading this, please feel free to leave a comment below, and I'll happily try and walk you through what you should do. So I'm a 20-year-old female, and this probably happened when I was about 15. So growing up, I visited my father and stepmother every summer for about a month. One evening when I was visiting, my stepmom and I went for a walk around their neighborhood. The walk started out completely normal until, well, it just wasn't. Because as we walked past these two houses, whose backyards were viewable, we spotted something so strange happening between them that we stopped dead in our tracks. For like 20 seconds, we just sort of stood in silence trying to decipher what our eyes were seeing. Keep in mind the sun was setting, so it was kind of dark. But first, we see a dog in one of the yards. It was standing right at the fence line and peering into the neighboring yard. The fences were those metal ones that you can see through. But then we see the thing that the dog was looking at. In the other yard, crouched low to the ground, was, at first glance, this undefinable mass. Was it another dog? No. A child playing outside? No. It was a completely naked man on all fours, crouched on the ground and crawling. He slowly crawled towards this dog in the most disturbing and disgusting way that I've ever seen a human move. Behind him were his clothes perfectly folded in a pile waiting to be put back on. My stepmom and I just couldn't form words as we watched this man approach this really confused dog. When we reached the fence line where the dog stood, he then proceeded to shove his face into the fence to what appeared to be him greeting the dog. After my stepmom and I fully realized what we were seeing, we just sort of turned around and we sped walk to tell my father, who is a cop. He didn't believe us one bit. I'll admit that my stepmom and I tend to make anything that we experience together 20 times more dramatic, but he eventually bought our very real account and called it in. And we later found out that this creep is known for breaking into people's yards, stripping naked, and playing with their pets. My stepmom still feels bad about young me seeing that, but I don't know. I think it's a bit funny, sort of weird and a bit creepy as well. It's definitely a strange way to see your first nude man, that's for sure. But anyway, after that we never saw the nude man again because, well, I guess he was probably locked up.